Here.
Weedman. Here. Mack.
Here.
LaCroy.
Here.
Mesco.
Here.
Braden. Here.
That's one. Let's switch it to
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
Second.
Any questions?
Mesco.
Aye.
Strack.
Aye.
Mack.
Aye.
Weedman. Braden. Aye. LaCroy.
Motion carries. Seeing no audience members, we'll say there are no public comments. Budget hearing presentation. I imagine we'll have time.
All right. Well, it's that time of year for our wonderful budget presentation and budget adoption for the fiscal year. As you saw from, I'm sure, your word packets, there's not a lot really that has changed in what the overall presentation was, but still, there's legal requirements that we have to go through this, so we're going to go through it. And we want to make it as enjoyable as possible as we know we're talking about budgets as much as I do. So first of all, expenses, there were salary increases of about 3.25% from contract negotiations and raises. We did see an increase in our HMO costs of about 5.6%. And then our PPO and high deductible health plan also increased about 5.8%. The dental PPO, we were fortunate to Fortunately, with the dental PPO, we had a flat, well, it was about 0.001, but it was about a flat increase or decrease, depending on how you look at it. Workers' compensation, we had a rather large claim several years back, and how they calculate workers' comp is kind of a rolling average, and that fell off, so we were fortunate to see a rather large reduction in our total costs for workers' compensation. Property casualty insurance has increased about 1.97%. CEDAW, as it's getting to be pretty normal for us to experience, increased about 4.47%, we're estimating. The transportation, thanks to the work of Kim Frost, we were expecting a total decrease of about 5% in some of our costs for transportation. Natural gas and electricity, we're all expecting about a 5% increase. The solar panels are kind of offsetting some of that expense. We'll get into that a little bit further down in the meeting. Solar panel project expenses are going to be a large chunk of our capital projects expenses for the year, and you'll see, as you saw in the last meeting, it'll cause us to have a net loss on the year. We'll be running a deficit, but only because we had planned to use a lot of our existing fund balance to try to cover as much of that as we could. And then finally, we had the additional staff that we expected with full-day kindergarten and some EL programming expansions. In terms of revenue, as we mentioned last time, the evidence-based funding, we had a net increase of $898,000. They did some recalculations with technology, and that actually dropped us from Tier 2 to Tier 1, which is the most in need level of districts, and that gave us some additional funding this year, which we're excited about, and we will be talking about later on tonight as well. We also have special ed personnel decrease of $380,000. So it's not that we are having a decrease in the total personnel, it's that on top, we got $898,000 additional from the state, but the personnel is now rolled into the evidence-based funding. So it's not that we decreased personnel, it's just we're not going to be getting the reimbursement from the state of the $380,000 that we normally would have expected. Operating levy revenue increase of about $616,000, about a 2.25% increase. Early childhood, unfortunately, this year it was a very competitive grant process and we lost out on the early childhood grant funding, so that's a net decrease in our revenues. But we are still anticipating getting SREC and inverter income that's all tied to our solar panel project. Yeah.
Ballpark, how much did we lose out on the grant that we did get? How much was that about roughly? I mean, lose out is not the right term, but.
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. Part of it is, I mean, I know what we had last year.
Okay, what did we have last year?
I think it was, do you remember off the top of your head?
It was $136,000.
Okay.
It's around, it's quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the inverter rebate again, what's that amount to?
That I will cover. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I have it in the financial package, which we'll talk about. I'm sorry, what?
I get it.
So to go fund by fund, what we're kind of looking at, we are looking at a net decrease in local, just to highlight some of the things in the education fund. We're going to see a pretty big loss in our other local revenue, and that has to do a lot with our full-day kindergarten tuition revenue. Going to full-day kindergarten and not collecting tuition on it. That would explain why we're not going to be getting as much in our other local revenue. And then that gives you kind of a lot of that difference. To answer your other question, Tom, has to do with some of the grants that we lost, and the early childhood is in that number. And as you can see from salaries, there's the net increase, the medical and dental increases. And then this area was interesting to me, and in talking with Chris, essentially what had happened was over time, as you're working through your budget, budgets are always a projection of what you're going to spend, right? This is what we think we're going to spend in these areas. And this was a year that Chris and I took the time to actually look through and go, okay, based upon trends, are we actually hitting some of these numbers that we're budgeting for? How do we reallocate some of this money to actually capture what we're spending in those areas? So we're going to be seeing a net decrease in purchase services and a net decrease in supplies, but we'll be seeing a little bit more, obviously. That's a big percentage increase, but it's a smaller amount of money, as you can tell. In capital expenses, just have a couple more big purchases that we'll be doing throughout the course of the year. Tuition and other expenses, we're projecting it to go down a little bit, which we're hoping for. We'll see increase, but we've seen an increase of $800,000 in the past 2 years. This has a lot to do with CDAL and a lot of our outplacement of students. And then non-capitalized goods. This is one of those areas where I mentioned where when Chris and I looked at it, it always seemed to fall more as a capital outlay instead of a non-capitalized goods based upon a board policy and dollar levels for that. So overall in our education fund, as you can see, we're going to be running a net surplus of about $600,000.
Mainly due to the evidence-based funding.
Exactly. Like I said, all that's kind of baked into here. We lost some of the grant funding, but we did get a net increase with the evidence-based funding. Operations and maintenance. We did reduce the levy in this area. It's not so much that we're getting less money in this area as much as we're when you write your levy, there's, it's like a pie. You're allowed to move the money around into different areas essentially. And we chose to not levy as much in the operations and maintenance fund in the hopes of bringing up some of our other fund balances in the more strategic areas. So that's why you're seeing a net decrease in the operations and maintenance fund levy for the year. Other local sources of money we're anticipating, even though we ended up with a large increase in other local revenue from operations and maintenance, that large increase is tied almost exclusively to the Frederick Bus Lot project and the money that we're anticipating to get back from the village for their half of the project. Otherwise, you'll notice that we actually are experiencing decreased usage of our buildings and getting less money for renting out our buildings. We have a 2.75% salary increase in our operations and maintenance fund. The benefits, the slight increase due to our Blue Cross Blue Shield and our other anticipated expenses related to insurance. Overall, supplies and capital outlay. The biggest thing about the capital outlay reduction was a lot of this money was tied to the middle school roof project from last summer. And then this year, even though we have a lot more capital projects happening, they're going to be going on in our capital projects fund instead of in our operations and maintenance fund. So you'll see that's the biggest reason for why there's that big drop off in our capital outlay expenditures. There's also going to be some other local revenue increases. This is going to be, this is tied almost exclusively to the interest payments that we have on the debt certificates that we receive for our solar project.
It's a good percent problem.
Yeah, it looks like a big jump. That's one of the, I know, I debated even having the percentage up there for that very reason is that, you know.
Tiebreaker on the final exam.
There you go. There's a pop quiz on this later too, by the way, so. So overall you'll see, and we're running a net deficit in this fund, and a lot of it has to do with just because we're reallocating money from this fund to other funds in the form of not levying as much in this fund and levying more in other funds. So even though there's a deficit here, it's actually, it's a good thing for us because we have this estimated fund balance of 3.7 million, which the fund balance to expense means we have enough money right now to cover our expenses in a healthy manner for a solid year. So we just wanted to take advantage of that fund balance ratio now and use it in other areas. Debt service fund, as I said before, is pretty straightforward. This is largely managed by the county. You tell the county, here are our obligations, the debts that the district owes. The county levies money to cover those expenses, so it's actually a pretty straightforward fund. There's not a whole lot of movement in or out of it, as you can tell by the relatively low percentages. We're projecting a net surplus, and you would think if you know what your mortgage is every year, and you would think that if the county knew what your mortgage was every year, they could just levy exactly that. But a lot of the times what you'll see for the surplus in these funds has to do with timings of payments and timings of the county will normally do just a little bit more than what your mortgage payment is, and that's trying to anticipate things like people who don't pay their property taxes, or they don't pay them for a year and they pay them next year. So overall, you'll see a net fraction of a percent really when you consider 82,000 from the 7 million, but they still levy just a little bit more, so we're trying to capture that in this. Transportation fund. Again, this was another one of those funds where we had a pretty healthy fund balance compared to some other funds, so we're going to be projecting a net reduction in our levy. And we'll also have a little bit more anticipated in our field trip collections. Just looking back in years past in the trends, we seem to have a little bit more. We always seem to be getting a little bit more than what we anticipated for. So we just adjusted our budget to account for that. Other state payments, we have our standard state categorical payments in transportation. And again, part of this, again, it's a larger, scary percent, but really it's only a couple thousand, and that had to do with the early childhood portion of the grant that we will not be receiving this year. When we get down to expenditures, we had projected for the new salary and the new position, so that's why there's a large increase in the salary and benefits in this area. And then purchase services, though, is the one I'd like to highlight the most. Again, thanks to the work of Kim Frost, we were able to see a pretty dramatic reduction overall. Even though Durham increased our rates, she was able to consolidate several routes and save us quite a bit of money. So we're very thankful and appreciative of that, and the budget reflects it. And then obviously the net increase in fuel costs. So in light of all of that, we're still projecting to have, even with the loss of some of our grants and the reduction in our levy, we're still projecting a net surplus in the fund and a nice healthy fund balance with about a 34% fund balance ratio. Lastly, or not lastly, Fund 50, our retirement fund. This is our IMRF and Social Security. Pretty straightforward as well. We have a little bit more in this fund for a levy for this year, and a little bit more in our other local revenue. But this is where you see your normal benefits for a lot of our PSRPs and support staff and a lot of the rest of the staff as well with Medicare, IMRF. CDALS gets their cut for IMRF and FICA. So overall, we keep this one this one's usually a little bit easier to budget because you know what your staff is going to be. So we only have a net surplus of about $21,000, and again, a nice healthy fund balance ratio of 36%. So here's the fun part. So the capital projects fund, this is where I definitely didn't even put a percent because I don't think it would have even fit in the column. Last year we did about $24,000 for the budget. This year we're projecting about $5.97 million. So that's part of the expenditures down here. That's the solar panel capital outlay. The other local revenue here is going to be, we have the debt certificates that we purchased, or that we received the funding from for $4 million. And then the other $1.97 million is going to be a transfer out of our working cash fund, which I'll get to that fund next. But this is where there's not a lot on the screen, but there is a lot of action moving around. So overall, we're projecting about a net surplus of about $2,000, which again, in light of $6 million, is a pretty tight budget, but we're confident we'll be able to meet this budget easily. And then we have, this is a fund that we don't normally keep much of a balance in, so it's a smaller fund balance, but this is really when you have those big projects like the solar panels and whatnot, this is when you use this fund. So fund balance isn't as important in this area. Working cash fund, this is where we have our token amount of the levy. It's just interesting. We have to levy in this every single year, so we put in a little bit. Because if you don't levy in it, then you have to completely abolish it, and you don't get a chance to levy it in the future. So that's why you'll see the little token amounts. And then the big thing here, the big action in this is where we're going to be getting the funding from in order to finish off our solar panel projects. This $1.955 million that we're transferring out is tied to developer fees and fund balance and things that are pretty restricted in how we could have spent the money to begin with. Developer fees specifically we have to use towards capital projects related to the school buildings directly affected by those developments. So this literally was a perfect opportunity to take advantage of those funds and use it in such a way that the district gets a really large benefit with solar panel projects. So I could go on and on about that, but you'll see that more in a minute. Tort fund, it's the smallest. Well, like I said, we all love it. It's just this is where a lot of our different expenses come in from some of our workers' comp insurance and other insurances. Some of our legal fees come out of here as well. So it's pretty standard. This budget area is probably the most standard and stable over the last 5 or 6 years as I've looked back on the history of the district. So not much changes with the levy and not much changes with purchase services. So this is a pretty straightforward one. And as you can tell, the amounts it's got a nice healthy fund balance of 99%. So this, similar to the operations and maintenance fund, has about a year's worth of expenses in it. So we feel pretty confident this is a nice healthy fund. So to quickly summarize it all and put it in looking at it in a different way, We have our fiscal year 18 budget compared to our fiscal year 19 budget. Levy is overall a net increase in our levy. Other local revenue, this is where that big jump comes in from the debt certificates that we receive funding from. And then you'll notice the big jump in we call it general state aid, but still evidence-based funding of that $898,000, which we're excited about. And then as we mentioned, there was a loss in some of our state funding, not just because we didn't receive the grant, but because some of that then gets folded into our evidence-based funding formula. And then federal, we're projecting to basically stay about the same. Salaries and benefits, we mentioned some of the increases, both in terms of the annual raises that we receive every year and the increase in FTEs. So that seems pretty about standard for us looking in years past as well. Benefits, purchase services, again, the biggest jump you'll see is just coming through some of these other areas like our capital outlay section for the solar panel. I think I mentioned this last time, but I really want to stress, I know it can look daunting and scary to see negative numbers for a net surplus or net deficit, but again, this was planned by us. It's not a sign that we are fiscally insolvent in any way. It's just using our available fund balances to, specifically for this, it was $1.3 million that we spent in June that put us into a deficit. For the solar panels, that was the initial payment on our solar panel project. And then we have the rest of our solar panel project where we're using some of our funds for that as well. So if you take out the capital projects portions of this in terms of basically our solar panel, we are running surpluses. So we're excited about that. Any questions? Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Yes. We have a presentation. Thank you.
True story. This sat there for 10 minutes.
All right.
So Amanda and I are very happy that we are being able to talk with you tonight about civics. It was a topic that was maybe now. I'll start again. Amanda and I are very happy that we're able to share a little bit about civics. It was a topic that was asked for us to provide some more information to you. So we're going to go through what we know about civics right now and how the changes have been occurring. There is a packet that should have been at your spot that we're going to reference at times. So just want you to make sure that you have that information. So we are going to start with some quotes that we found about civic education. And I will completely admit that I should have done a little bit more research in that I've seen it written both ways, that it's civics education or civic education, and I don't really know what's the correct way yet. So I hope to have that answer soon. You'll see in some of the quotes they have it in both ways. So these are just some quotes that we found that we thought were interesting about civics education and how important it is to think about one's place in a community. So all of these things are about where all this came from. So in your packet, there is this, I think the second page looks like something like this. And so there was recently the national organizations came together and looked at having a new set of standards, and they called them the C3
And so that's what this packet is. And you'll see it says College Career and Civic Life, C3 Framework for Social Studies State Standards. So this is the main document that we've been using. Interestingly, the state of Illinois took this main document and made it their own. So that's where they also have made a change from social studies, as it says here on this document, and the state of Illinois has now changed it to social science. And so there was a nuanced difference in all of that, and I actually am happy that they actually made a change in the name. And so one of the things I remember, Amanda and I were both with the teachers when we were working on it, we did a compare and contrast of what social studies was and what social science will be. And so there is a significant difference. And so the C3 framework is obviously for college, career, and civic life. It's broken into 5 main categories by the state of Illinois. One of them, and probably the most important one, the biggest, meatiest one, is inquiry. So instead of just telling kids information, we're really hoping for kids to investigate, to question, to wonder, to learn themselves instead of just being given a set of information. The second category is civics. The next one is economics and financial literacy, geography, and then history. And so if you think about social studies in the past, social studies was probably majority of history. If you think about the courses that we've all taken in social studies, they were mostly facts and figures and dates and places and names and all of that. In the new social science standards in Illinois, it's really only become a portion of what social science is going to be. So the packet that we provided you, you may notice that the page numbers are not consecutive and that they don't start on page 1. So we just went into the document and pulled all of the national standards for civics so that we had a starting point to look at that. Do I add something? So that's where all of this comes from the college and career framework, the C3 framework. And so we are going to be addressing some of the civic standards in 3 different ways. So in District 46, we're going to be looking at the social science standards, which are based on the C3 framework, the technology education standards, which are based on ISTE, and ISTE stands for... I was throwing it to her because I couldn't remember all of them. ISTE, I-S-T-E. And then we're also... I think that's what it is too nowadays. And then also the social emotional learning standards. So those are the 3 big components of where you're going to see some civics education, civics embedded into the school day. So during social science time, hopefully integrated all the time with technology usage, and then also under SEL. So when we look at the social science standards from Illinois, it's really, we've given a lot of words here for us to talk about, but I love that first line. At its heart, the social sciences explore the relationship between individuals and society, from friends and family to global networks. So that's really the big idea, and I think that's where civics is going to fit in greatly, because we're looking for students to participate in all of those areas. So again, you can see it's the civics, economics, geography, and history, and then under the umbrella of inquiry. So that's going to be the big idea. So there's 3 strands under the social science standards for civics. So one is about civic and political institutions. One is about participation and deliberation, applying civic virtues and democratic principles, and processes, rules, and laws. Phew, that's a lot to think about. So in your packet, there is a handout.
Then when you flip, the next one is the same thing. What we want all students to know, be able to do with respect to participation and deliberation. collaboration. And then the third page there is what we want all students to know, be able to do with respect to processes, rules, and laws. And so what Illinois has done, these are again from the C3 framework, which is from the National Social Studies group. What Illinois has done is they have actually taken these and broken them down into more grade level targets. So when you look, for example, on this sheet, it says by the end of second grade, students will know and be able to do this. Illinois then took that and kind of chunked it down and said by the end of kindergarten, here's where students will be by the end of first grade and second grade. And so our teachers are now in the process, or have gone through the process of identifying which of those targets they have deemed as priority and we're going to be looking at.
What document did these pages come from? A national document or a state document?
The C3, so on the bottom,
National
you say,
document.
you'll see C3 framework. So that's the
Okay, but
national
is this-
document.
Is this a national publication that these were taken from, or a state publication?
National.
National, okay.
Yes.
So to give you some ideas what all that means, because those are a lot of words. And so for us to really think about processes, rules, and laws, for example, as young as first and second grade, we're going to talk about class rules and family rules and about rules when you're out in public, what are appropriate things to do and to act, what's expected behaviors. Those are appropriate topics for that grade level. They're going to move into consensus building. And so instead of going immediately to voting, to be able to talk with everyone has a voice, everyone should be able to share their opinions and building consensus in how to establish those rules in our classroom. So it's all starting with the classroom with the kids in mind and not necessarily moving immediately to above and beyond into community or those things. When you get to about third grade, we're going to start continuing to talk about community, and so that's where we're going to have some connections in our system to talk to community leaders. Hint, hint, maybe some school board members are going to be asked about how rules or laws or procedures are developed. They might be calling. I'll just let you know that they might be calling and asking for some support in demonstrating how it actually happens in real life. So that's also talking about the different structures of our communities that we serve, about if it's a mayor, if it's a village manager, if it's a whatever. So we're going to be talking about all of those different structures in those grade levels. It goes on very quickly in fourth and fifth grade. It's going to talk more about local government, to state government, into federal government. So that's where it's going to go into all of that information about the branches of government, the roles of the specific people, but also the roles of the individuals in each of those. And so many of the grades have inquiry about how can you make an impact in your school, how can you make an impact in your community, how can you make an impact in our state, how can you make an impact in our world. And so that's part of the inquiry standards, to take what we're learning about civics, about how to be a community member of our local community, but also a citizen of the state, a citizen of the world, citizen of the universe, to be able to think through all those kind of things. So I was really very excited when the teachers, the K-4 teachers, met together, and they saw a natural progression of how that it's developmentally appropriate to start with the kid's world and the youngest child's world first, and then to move on into all the other layers of where they are. So I was very, very happy about it. So it's going to feel a little bit different than we've done in the past. About many of our social studies concepts in the past, we're going to continue, but we're going to maybe, instead of giving information, we're going to ask kids to find the information. And so to answer critical questions. Some of the targets in many of the grade levels are to write questions of a topic of interest related to the topic of study. So write questions, and then the next follow-up target is try to solve those questions, research them. And so I think that's really the nice connection that we've been thinking about. When I've been talking about the K-4, what we actually did is, remember that the 5-8 teachers have a dedicated social science teacher, and the K-4 teachers are generalists. They teach all of them. And so we had started that process with the 5-8 teachers a year prior. So the 5th through 8th graders fifth through eighth grade teachers have already had a full year of work on that. I should say the fifth through seventh grade teachers had a full year of an advanced planning and work on that. And we purposely did that to eliminate eighth grade. They're starting this year for the first time with new standards, new expectations, because seventh and eighth grade is very cumulative. Whatever seventh grade ends, eighth grade picks up right away. And so we couldn't start fresh with our new plan with a group of students because they would have been off cycle. They would have missed some important concepts. So this year, eighth grade is continuing with what seventh grade started last year. And the exciting part for them is that they have grasped onto the idea that social science needs to be more global and not so history-based. So they are really integrating a lot of conversations and a lot of comparisons so that they can say, remember when we learned about this event in history and how it impacted another event in history. I think you've mentioned that in the past to me. And then how it could change in the future. So they're looking at some themes. They're looking at the middle school in particular decided to do our social science curriculum in a timeline-based series. So they're still going that kids should know that the Revolutionary War was before or after World War I, and they should know that important events about going to the moon was before or after the Civil War. They should know some points in time relative to timeline. And you kind of smile, but kids do get confused about all of those events. So they've been trying to connect all of those things. But more importantly, it's all about being an active participant. They've created ways for the kids to have service projects or to learn about new things, to share with each other. That's where all the technology things come into play.
So then, yes, we have our ISTE standards, which, I missed a word, International Society for Technology Education. These are not what we may traditionally think of as our technology standards. It's not students will be able to type so many words per minute, students will be able to turn on and off devices. This is all about students being digital citizens and living in the digital world. So the heart of these standards is really to get students to understand that they have a duty when they are living in their digital world. So there are 3 standards specifically when we kind of think of our social science, civics connections that really kind of integrate that technology into it. And I believe there is a handout after the C3 handouts for the technology. So you have the little logo there, and the page after that will show you those 3 standards that kind of correlate to the civics education. So the first one would be standard 2, which is digital citizenship. Essentially, we are trying to instill in our students that you have to act in ways that are safe, legal, and ethical, not only when you are living in your personal life, but when you are living in the digital world as well. So we are working currently with the information specialist to kind of break down these standards and what they would mean appropriately for our youngest students to our oldest students. Then moving on.
So in that one, digital citizenship is also where we're going to look on some things we've done in the past about online safety, about not sharing information, all of those kind of things. But it also talks about sharing intellectual property. And so that means about plagiarism, it means about citing your sources, and it means about checking your sources, all of those kind of things as well.
So then we move into knowledge constructor. So we want the students to not only maybe be given some information about history or civics, but we want them to start constructing their own knowledge. So we want them to use their digital tools and use what they've learned on how to be ethical and safe online to construct their own knowledge and to work with others to construct that knowledge and to look up different viewpoints on ideas and then create their own opinion or their own ideas and their own meaningful learning experiences.
On that first bullet, under A, 3A, it says plan and employ effective research strategies to locate information. We're being very developmental about that too. The youngest students are probably going to be given 2 or 3 sources to go to that we have provided the kids, and that we know that the content is, they're able to read and they're able to understand it, to moving on in the grade level where they're going to be able to have to evaluate the sources to decide if it is a worthwhile source, if it's a credible source, if it is not so credible. When you talk to kids right now, they know that Wikipedia is not the most reliable source because any of us can go in and edit in Wikipedia. But we know that if we're going to a museum site, or that we're going to a research foundation, or that we're going to a more reputable institution, that our information is going to likely have more validity, more weight and value. So again, that's all about planning their research. We don't want to have to tell kids, you're researching this and you're researching this. We want them to figure out how to do that research and where to go. And part of it is even helping kids understand what to put in Google as the question. And I know that's an important thing for all of us when we're doing research, to ask the right, put in the right search words or the right search limitations, any of those kind of things. So we're going to begin developing those skills with kids about being productive, accurate, responsible.
And then once we've done that, then we finally get on to our last standard, which is called Global Collaborator. We want students to be able to use the tools that they have at their disposal, digital and otherwise, to collaborate with peers, to collaborate with people within their community, to collaborate with people within the country, internationally, globally. We want to be able to provide opportunities for them to collaborate with people outside maybe their own specific community, so they can become those global collaborators to create, to share, to learn from each other. So these technology standards aren't, like I said, your typical, what you might think you might go into a computer lab and do. These are really trying to get our students to understand that we are living in a new digital world, and there are things that we have to do and be responsible for within that digital world.
I could give an example of that sharing around the world. I met with the reading specialists just last week, and many of them are trying a reading strategy called Book a Day. So they go into classrooms and share a book a day, and they connect it to the learning targets that are going on with instruction at that moment. And many of the reading specialists, with a little bit of support from some of the technology staff, have been tweeting about it. So they've been sending tweets out about the book that they read that day, and sometimes they pose a question with the class that they're working on, and they look for feedback. And so last week, the reading specialists were very excited that we had 2 or 3 national authors of the books that they had chosen respond to the class. And so the kids, of course, thought that was pretty magical and pretty powerful. They do now expect that every author is going to be responding in a timely fashion. But it was very exciting for them to say that we actually got a tag on the Twitter account from the author saying, I hope you enjoyed the book, or here's my answer to your question. To me, that's a pretty amazing tool for kids to be able to experience. So that was just a recent example that just happened last week.
So then finally we have our Illinois Social Emotional Learning Standards, which interestingly enough, when we were working with the K-4 teachers to kind of do a deep dive into the Illinois social science standards, many of them, when they were looking at some of the inquiry skills, were like, this kind of seems like it would be social emotional learning. Well, we also have our social emotional learning, so a lot of this SEL will be fitting nicely into our social science time. So we want to, with our SEL, the standards were recently relaunched. So we are in a period of relaunch in our district about some learning and figuring out the best ways to integrate these standards into daily class. But we want the students to be able to be socially aware and to use their interpersonal skills to maintain good relationships, and not only in school, but in their personal lives as well. So essentially there are 3 goals for the SEL standards. Goal number 1 is all about me. How do I identify my emotions? How do I self-regulate my own emotions? What do I do when I'm feeling happy, angry, sad, any of those emotions? But goals 2 and 3 are kind of where we speak a little bit more to that civic mindedness. So goal 2 is all about using our social awareness and our interpersonal skills to establish and maintain positive relationships. Understanding that somebody else might not be feeling the same way I might be feeling. Understanding and respecting that somebody else might have a different opinion than me, and that's okay. And using my communication skills to be able to talk to people who might have different opinions than myself. And again, and that's okay. And then using our interpersonal skills to resolve conflicts. So
you're building consensus, but we talked about earlier, you need some of those kind of things. If we're trying to understand how different people have different perspectives about the same issue, we need to be able to understand how to communicate effectively. At the committee, we talked about that our youngest kids need help in sentence starters. How do you initiate a conversation when you're disagreeing with somebody or you have a different opinion? Now we realized maybe all of us need those sentence starters at times to be able to have a conversation. If you disagree with somebody or you want to have an alternate view. And then it's also that whole idea in this one is that everyone has to have a voice. We need to be able to give opportunities to everyone to communicate their ideas when you're building consensus or you're trying to move the group along or to identify what's the best for the group. Those are important components of all this.
And then moving in, once we are able to communicate and use our interpersonal skills in that way, we want to demonstrate that as a group, we can collectively make decisions and show responsible behaviors, not only in our personal life, not only in our school life, but when we're interacting with our community. So how do we make decisions on a local basis, on a personal basis, in my family, in my classroom, in my community, and in the world? And that really goes back to some of those C3 civics standards where I'm talking about making decisions, when I'm talking about building consensus. So it kind of all circles back together, and finally we want the students to be able to contribute to the well-being of their school community. So we want the students adding that value into their school, into their classroom, and with their classmates. So finally, next steps. We're going to be implementing this year the social science standards with grades K-4. The teachers have been working really hard. One of the things that Paul is holding is we found these nice resources called 180 Days of Social Studies for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all the way up through 5th and 6th grade. And what they have is they have those 5 different strands of social science that we talked about, including some very age-appropriate civics lessons that the teachers can use if they so choose.
We wanted to provide something for teachers to have so that they weren't having to create everything.
Yes.
The current social studies books that we have are definitely very good on the history part. And so we needed to be able to provide a resource. It's not the only resource. It's not
Not the be-all
and
and
end-all. It's not the everything. But we wanted to give them something. And they have been very appreciative of having something that they can use in multiple different ways.
And then one of the other resources we've been using with our 5-8, 6-8, when we are doing our continued implementation, it's called mini Qs in civics. They're DBQs, document-based questions. So essentially what the students are provided with is they are provided with a reading from typically a primary or a secondary source, some piece of reputable writing. Teachers go through it with the students, sometimes showing them how to annotate. Sometimes the students are challenged to build that stamina and read the document on their own. And then they are asked to take that document and answer specific questions. Some of them might be easy questions like in paragraph 2, what did the author state about this? And then they kind of build into a little bit more inferencing, a little bit more inquiry where the students have to draw their own conclusion about what they've read. And so this whole binder is full of civics-minded documents and questions. So I believe when I was looking through, there was one about voting, there was one about the judiciary, there was something about, I don't know what else was there, I'm drawing a blank.
Lots about the Constitution,
Lots about the
search and seizure, jury system, compulsory voting, campaign, propaganda, electoral college, Declaration of Independence preamble. So this is a resource that we have. We have some of these, this series. The high school is very happy that we're looking at the structure of a DBQ, looking at a primary source and being able to ask critical questions and to analyze, because that will very much help students when they get to the high school. This is not what they do today, but they also wanted to have some resources. And this is a brand new publication that they were very excited about in the series that, and I'm looking at my friend here who works in this building, that these are pretty a good resource. The BBQs are a good resource, and now we have some new ones. So what they've done is they've looked at all of these and they've matched them. These would be more appropriate to fit into the content of 7th grade. These would be more appropriate to fit into the content of 8th grade. Little bit less in 6th grade, but a little bit to get there. But we just wanted to make sure that we were giving teachers some support. We're always on the lookout as well to see what else is out there. There are a number of things that we've been using, websites that we've been using, organizations that we've been looking. The social science teachers have been
They have been curating like crazy.
working hard to get all of those things.
So we will definitely continue to look for any other materials that can support our teachers, not only with civics, but with the economics and all of the social science strands. We will continue our work with our information specialists to unpack those ISTE standards and see where they appropriately fit into the curriculum. And we will continue.
So I can talk about that ISTE standards a little bit. As Amanda said, those are really big global things, but we're also going to be identifying by grade level what kids by the end of the year should be able to do with a piece of technology. So there are some skills that are going on, but not necessarily specific to civics. So there's more to it than just looking at the civics component of ISTE.
And we will continue our work with our SEL PDT to figure out the best way to implement those social emotional learning standards within the classroom on a daily basis.
So interestingly, from kindergarten through 4th grade, our report card is now going to have a category called civics. And so they will be giving grades in each grade from kindergarten to 4th grade. And we'll be moving that up into 5th or 8th grade too. So every one of our scope and sequence documents for the entire K-8 have civics as a category, along with history and geography and inquiry and economics and financial literacy. And that is a whole other topic because many teachers are not necessarily, that's not their, they're not in their comfort zone because it's typically not something that we taught. But that's really going to be a connection to local communities. We're looking at a relationship with a local bank to help us. That document was shared and they were very appreciative of the banking and all those things. So it's going to be about saving and interest.
Wants and needs.
All kinds of things. So there's a lot going on about civics. It's not necessarily just going to be one moment in time during the day. It's going to be spread out a number of times throughout the day, always evaluating, always looking at sources, always looking at validity of information, always questioning. And I really love the whole idea about that it's inquiry and that kids are going to be helped to ask questions and then figure out how to solve those questions, maybe as a group, maybe as a We welcome any questions.
Did you use the acronym DBQ?
DBQ, it's document-based question.
Okay, that's what I need to know.
That is a very common term that middle school kids know inside and out.
Inside and out.
There's a way to address a DBQ, a document-based question.
I think this presentation and this information would be good to bring back to the diversity committee for some of our conversations. I think there's a natural intersection between civics, education, and social justice, and diversity, and understanding this from some of the questions that we've already posed each other on the diversity committee might actually inspire further ideas and actions and give those committee members an idea of what's happening in the classrooms.
Well, that one,
And what the
I know at a recent meeting, we talked about different perspectives.
Yes, right, right.
Seeing history from
As a
different
different perspective,
perspectives.
right.
And that we only really see, we were all taught really one version of history.
Right.
But there's actually multiple versions of history based on the participants. So we've been beginning to have those
Yeah, and this is what's
conversations.
happening in the classroom, so I think that would be helpful for some.
Great.
And I
We're
think,
glad to do
yeah, I
that.
think what we've been grappling with in the committee too is how do we help teachers embrace diversity as not just another thing they have to do in their already really busy day. So I think this also maybe provides some integration points where it feels more integrated than, and you also have to do this. So we could look at that as well.
It shouldn't be yet another thing.
Exactly.
Well, particularly important for people who had a different background than what we've had, and where all this stuff come from and whatever. I'll never forget about this, about 5 years ago, we were visiting Philadelphia, and people were lined up to see the various sites there. We'd seen them, and my wife and I went to school there. But anyway, we'd seen the Liberty Bell I don't know how many times, and then it was a very hot August day, and there was this line, I would say 50 feet long, people standing outside in the hot sun, just look at the Liberty Bell. And I looked at the line, and they were probably, I would say, 60% Pacific Rim natives, Asian in some way, okay? So I decided, bashful chap that I am, I decided I'd walk up to them and ask them, why are you standing here in the hot sun to see the Liberty Bell? I mean, whatever. And so they all looked at me and said, you Americans don't understand. You are a very, very young country, about 250 years old at that time. We come from countries that are over 1,000 years old. And what these people did 250 years ago is amazing. And we want to learn as much as we can about it. And that really was a game changer for me when these people said that.
Are there any questions that we can provide a response to?
I have a question about, there is a student council at Meadowview that I know about because I'm a Meadowview mom, and I love it because it's an entrance to civic engagement for kids, and it's very, like, discrete things that they can do, but it's definitely a start, and my son volunteered, and I was super excited about that. I'm wondering if that is something that exists in the other schools, or is that just a Meadowview thing?
I know there's student council at Frederick.
Okay.
Here, we have National Junior Honor Society that has the pillars, and civics is one of them. And in addition to that, so not just the academic students, but there's a service club this year attached to that, where we want to make sure. And then one of my goals was to have a student panel talking more about the social justice pieces, how to challenge or question whether there's rules or procedures. You know, you can ask why some things are placed. You can say this doesn't make sense, and how do you go about doing that? And doing that with someone who, you know, listens, just modeling for them how to do that, because they are questioning and they are asking, and I want them to know it's appropriate and to continue
With
doing
guidance
that.
and support in how to do that.
Right.
And that there's an appropriate way.
So I already have 2 topics for the panel. One's from prior, and another student came today, just with the struggle she was thinking about, and so that's her second topic, so. It'll go well.
I'm sorry, I can't answer the question about the school.
I know.
I'm just curious, because I think it's great. I'm just
I
hoping
believe
that
Park
other
does.
K4 especially, because you don't usually think about kids getting as involved that young, but I think it's great, and the way they've set it up is great. It's it's volunteering, and they do the tours, the kindergarten orientation. And I think it's just 3rd and 4th grade too.
I think Park does, but I'll find out.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Park does, but I'm not positive about the others.
Thanks.
So this is really just our first steps, because this is brand new for K4, and just year 1 for 8th grade, and year 2 for 6th, 7th, and 8th, and I think we're heading in a really great direction.
And the timing couldn't be better.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, a comment about being asked to go to a classroom or whatever. For the last 3 years, I've been asked to go to CLC for a government class. Just talk about school boards and how it's all set up and how it's and all that sort of thing.
Sure, all the teachers are listening, Tom, and they're gonna take that as an open invitation.
Well, our Mrs. Day went out last year, November 11th, in several classrooms. But it's, kids are fascinated by the government, they really are, how things are set up, and we need people to get more involved with what's going on now. Just an aside, you know, that every history teacher in Texas is the same person, coach.
What would we do without you, John?
What he said. Alrighty, board reports, if anyone has anything they want to share.
We just had one.
You sort of did, just have one, that's true. Nothing else then?
Well,
There was
I
something
got a
else?
couple of things here.
Okay.
We had a curriculum meeting with, I'll make it brief here, and that's an update on reporting, and we know we're kind of scared about what's, when schools like Barrington may get a report that they didn't meet certain standards. Apparently, there's a phrase, not substantive, or substantive, which may help us out. Maybe only you'll address that.
I'm going to later here, yep.
Okay, a bit later. The new teacher survey, it's in fine print, but this was excellent. There were comments in the new teacher survey. This is after they had their session and whatever. The types of comments that really made me open my eyeballs up were the people who said, they essentially said, we seem to have our act together here on curriculum and whatever. And some of these people are people who have been at another school before they came here. And it was quite positive. So at any rate, I went down through the whole thing and put down a lot of comments that I just didn't read, that I don't want to read all through here, but the new teachers had some very good things to say about how we're doing things and how prepared they felt they were made by the end of this meeting, and that's extremely important for a new teacher. And then on some of the newer things about equity versus diversity and whatever, there were a lot of people seem to realize that equity is really where we're heading, and diversity is something we need to understand a little better, but equity is a goal that should be our beacon out there. So those are the reports on the new teacher survey and the Opening Institute survey. High school articulation is going to be with math, science, and social studies in October. And I found that the instructional coaches and teachers are involved in all that, and that's great. There's an assessment for kindergarten readiness called Kids Assessment, which we put you in the 40th day of school. By the 40th day, yeah. Interesting things, I don't want to get into all the details or whatever, but from a curriculum standpoint, I think we're doing a lot of good things here.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Okay, Ellen?
We had the Park District report originally on the agenda, but we are postponing it to allow our staff to complete, to get how much it costs, we have to do how much square footage is in each building, and then how much, which areas of the building we have air conditioning and which areas we don't. So it's taken us a little bit longer to do an analysis of cost versus.
Okay.
So hopefully next week we're going to meet on Friday and look at it, and then the next board meeting we should have it. The enrollment document that I have at your place, this is based on the CASARDA report that we had that was done for the next, I think, 15 years. I will bring that whole report on just the total enrollment, because it's many pages, but I can actually bring the whole thing. But if you look at the numbers, you can see where we've increased, where we've decreased. Overall enrollment this year is about 80, down 80 from last year. On Frederick, we made a mistake. So less anticipated should be 644, then 651, and 658. Don't know how Sue and I both missed that, but we did. So you can see where our numbers are less and where they're more. But we're going to continue to monitor it, see where we go with this. But I think it's something that needs to stay on the board radar.
Yeah, I mean, we need to keep
Yeah.
an eye on it, for sure.
Yeah. The idea of staff attendance was brought up with our last board meeting. We've done a lot of work on trying to work through that data. The data that was shared is on the Illinois Interactive Report Card, as it turns out, was said 2017, but it was actually based on data given to them through the Office of Civil Rights in 2013-14. So for us, that data doesn't mean a whole lot. Now, do I think that that there may be some issues with staff attendance? Yes. However, what we're trying to do in John's work, many hours on this, trying to do an analysis of our staff attendance given on current figures and looking back last year, the last 2 years. We need to take out the professional development. Right now, it looks like about 20% of our absences are for professional development. We need to look at how our, the staff that are on maternity leave. And so anyway, we're looking through each of these items, and we'll be able to have some information for you. I've also asked each of the buildings, what are they doing in their buildings to support and celebrate staff, and so I'll have that information as well. So,
are we trying to find out if there's abuse of time off?
I don't know. It was brought up at the board meeting, and
Well, I
there
think
was a
the
concern.
the rate seemed high, so we just
Yeah.
wanted to know why that was.
And the way it was listed on the Illinois report card was percentage of staff who had taken 10 or less days off during the year.
And it counts everything.
Right.
So it
So
doesn't
count
differentiate,
professional
right, doesn't differentiate between development
Just holidays, maternity leave.
all that stuff. So an absence is an absence.
We have to break all that down.
So that's what we're doing now, so that we can give, I think, a better, and more
Certainly,
honest,
a clearer
picture. Yeah,
Most of them get, what, 10 days off?
15.
15
Is it 15 or 13?
Depends when you use the service, I believe. But
No, not in PSRP, yes, but not in
Right.
teachers.
Oh, for the teachers,
Yes.
I think it's 13.
So they're giving them.
Pretty sure it's 6.
Well, we now have several
Two personal and
views of that. That's why we're doing a more in-depth analysis.
Two personal.
Yeah.
And just speaking of my work, I mean, for our vacation days, we have to use them or we lose them. So you're forced to take them. And they're there for you to take. There's reasons for you to take them, obviously. So, I just trying to figure out I understand where we're going. I think you're trying to figure out if there's an actual abuse or what the reason is for high amounts of days off. But if it's in their contract to get days off,
And you can't really
you
say.
can't really say they shouldn't take them.
Right.
It's not really their problem. It's in their contract to be able to
Right.
take them off.
And I have brought the union involved so that they know that we're looking at this. I didn't want them all of a sudden to hear at a board meeting that.
Well, I don't think they're abusing it, it's just, the numbers seem weird, so we just wanted to.
Right. And they are
better
weird.
understand what it is.
The longer we
4 years
look,
off.
right, and the longer we look into it, the
The
weirder
weirder
it
it
is.
gets,
And
yeah.
why you would go through the Office of Civil Rights.
What was the state report that was flagged? What was the description of that line item?
It said
Percentage
the
of staff.
percentage of staff that used 10 or fewer days, which that even doesn't make sense. It looks like it should be the other way,
Right.
but.
And that's where I thought you were going, was 10 or more days. And
Yeah,
So I was
no.
thinking, in other words,
So
that
you're-
is
so
there
you
a
want-
full allotment of contractually given days? Like, we're gonna track that? In my mind, if that number was 100%, we wouldn't even have an issue. Right? Everyone should be using, I think, right, we want them to be.
Are we
Could be.
talking when people come to school sick?
No, right, I know.
You want to wear Western, and you want to have their, just my world, sometimes you call it mental health.
recess and you take a break that you may have to have in a long winter, but we're about February 15th or so.
What bothers me is that people are looking at this information and not knowing where it came from. They don't, I mean.
Or what it entails.
Right, so.
And it's out there for,
Yeah.
Everybody has to assume.
And it's not, and it took us a while to get to, even where the data came from. Everybody was asked, who gets it? Who sends it in? Is it coming in from this office or this? And when it came from the Office of Civil Rights, and it just makes absolutely.
Which we fill out every couple of years.
Right, we don't do it every year. Well, obviously, because it was 13, 14 data. So, anyway, it's a work in progress.
Flipped. So, in other words, those low numbers were actually good because it meant that
They took less, right.
70% of the staff was taking.
Maybe from the point of view of that report, then, they're saying, is administration coercing people to take fewer days than they should?
I don't know, but, I mean.
Counterintuitively, that's how it reads, right?
Yeah. So.
From the Office of Civil Rights, they might say, that might be the way
Right.
they're approaching it.
You're exactly right, right.
There isn't anybody that knows better if someone is abusing this than the building principal.
And that's, right, absolutely. And I can say over the last 14 years, we've had maybe 2 people, and those people we have worked very hard to put, other than that, I just don't see that. But.
And with all the teamwork we're doing, if somebody on the team isn't showing up, the other team is going
Right.
to notice that,
So anyway, we'll bring the information back. I don't think it's a huge problem in our district, but we'll certainly, it was brought to our attention. We'll work on it. And John, thank you for all the work that you've done with it so far.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I don't know if you could go that far, but.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Committee reports. Tom already spoke about the curriculum committee. Diversity.
So Diversity had our first meeting of the year, and we have had some interest in additional members, which is great. So we've got 2, correct?
2 new.
Two folks who submitted applications that we reviewed, and that was exciting to see. We have a decent sized group at this point.
It's diverse.
It's very diverse, yeah. Main topic was same as sounds like with the curriculum committee, which was looking at how staff reacted to the opening day speaker. So we went through those comments from the survey, and overall there was a range from I understand diversity is important, yep, get it, get that, to like the awareness, all the way to this was impactful and really led me to examine my own life in the way that I'm teaching. So I think we were able to move the needle. You can't move people from non-awareness to total commitment or action in 1 hour or 2 hours. But I think the vast majority of respondents had indicated they had some learning or insight from the session. So we thought that was a positive and really, is starting to move. I think what we need to do next is what we do next to continue that momentum, because it feels like there was some nice momentum started. And then finally, we still have the policies pending that we haven't quite finished yet, but we keep trying to plug away at them as we can.
Good, thank you. Policy committee did meet yesterday. We were discussing potential revisions to the dress code. Ellen was going to work on those revisions, and then policy committee will look at that and then provide a recommendation to the board. So I don't know. We don't really have a specific timeline for that.
No.
In the near future, but not 20 years from now, not tomorrow. So. Next, if I could have a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda, including the personnel report addendum.
Second.
I have a question on Mary Edley Allen. We're talking about reduce her FTE to 0.5 beginning October 15th until November 6th. Can we do that? Okay.
She'll have a sub. It's not like, there'll be a sub for it. So she's basically going to have part-time. We've had other staff do that.
she does that in the school year, and then it goes back to full time.
Maybe.
That's a new one for me.
It's a temporary.
I remember one years ago where somebody, not here, somebody essentially wanted to do subcontract. He said, I've got a certified teacher, you'll fill in for me, so whatever. No, it doesn't work that way.
Any other questions?
Braden,
Aye.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Strack,
Aye.
Masco,
Aye.
Mac,
Aye.
Weedman.
Motion carries. On our only action item tonight, if I could have a motion to approve the fiscal year 2018-2019 budget.
Second.
Are there any questions? Probably for John and not for me. Okay.
Weedman,
Aye.
Masco,
Aye.
Mac,
Aye.
Braden,
Aye.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Strack,
Aye. Motion carries. Solar project update, revenue update, or something.
So Jason had actually asked us before, about 2 meetings ago, I believe, to give just an update on where we are with the solar financial project, or the solar project financially. So I presented just a brief memo with some information on it, as well as a quick spreadsheet. Just to highlight a couple of the big things on it, you'll see that, to get to your question earlier, Tom, about when we're expecting the inverter rebates and when we're expecting the SREC income, as any good business manager is, I choose to be a little bit more conservative on when we're going to actually get that. So I'm estimating right now early 2019 for all of that. I think we would be getting it before then, but I'm just choosing to be a little bit more conservative about when we'll receive those checks. And then you'll see also the impact of the debt certificates on the overall expenses to the district. So years 1 and 2 obviously are going to be a little bit, aren't going to be net positive for the district. We kind of expect that. Yet year 1 is going to be the big project, right? Like these are the millions of dollars that we're spending to even start the project. And then we're going to be spending just a little bit of money as a net expense to the district for the debt certificates in 2019. I'm still working with the bank to kind of finalize some of those details. You'll see, if you look over towards the left-hand side, you'll see the costs for the debt certificates are pretty expensive in that first year. And we structured the debt that way intentionally because we were going to be getting those large payments from the inverter rebates and the SREC income. So the repayment schedule was structured in such a way to use that money to pay off as much debt as fast as possible. One of the great parts about the debt certificates that we have is there's no prepayment penalty. So as far as we're concerned, the faster we can pay these off, less interest we pay, and the better it is for the district. And I know we've talked about it being a net revenue, not revenue, but a net savings to the district over the life of the project. So far, we're projecting that that is the case. As you can see, we've projected all the way out to 2047, a net savings to the district over that time. Roughly in the next 25 years, 35 years, we're looking at about $5 million in savings as a result of the project.
Righty. Any questions?
Yeah, John, at what point does the cumulative effect on our expenses become favorable to us?
In terms of,
I guess in your spreadsheet, the far right column, when you know, at what point, project to date, does that number become a negative number or a savings to the district?
roughly about 2035. I know it isn't displayed on here, but that's about when we're projecting the upfront money that we spent to build the project will eventually, all the savings will catch up to what we had spent on it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. Review of board priorities.
So I'm going to blend the board priorities and the evidence-based funding together.
Okay.
4 people to get me ready for this. Takes a village, you're right. Come on, he's got to work for me. Yay! Oh, God, I can just use it. It's not a problem. You did. Okay, so, okay, this isn't even, it's not going anywhere, guys. Why does this happen
Maybe
to
it
me?
wasn't my thing.
I froze it? Hmm. Sorry. Okay, good. Where did it go? Okay, good. You're right there. All right, so we better go by the time it's up there. So the original, in 2015, the original strategic plan priorities were as follows. We added encore classes, full-day kindergarten, which we are doing already, foreign language, gifted and talented programming, STEM, we are doing that limited in our makerspaces, technology, which you'll see a recommendation from us within the next month or so, and air conditioning, which we've already done. We then met, and you decided, you voted on what are the top priorities. One-to-one technology, foreign language, full-day kindergarten, and added encore. So of the 4, we've done full-day kindergarten, and we are, again, going to have a recommendation to use our evidence-based funding, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, for the one-to-one technology. At some point in the near future, we're going to need to talk about other priorities. Not only what we already have here, but anything else that the board would like to see in the future. So, and this is sort of not very light. I have presented the evidence-based funding elements to you previously, but I wanted you to see them again. Again, core teachers, when they talk about core teachers for low-income students, their recommendation is 15 students per teacher. For K-3, 20 students per teacher. If you remember, our board priorities are K-2, 25, and 3-8, 30. So you can go down through here, specialist teachers, instructional facilitators, and what they did was use this very complicated formula to come up and see where each district is lacking, and we need to put extra money in to make us whole to do better with our student performance. So these are all parts of the 27 elements. Sometimes you'll see there's 24, sometimes you'll see there's 26, but originally there were 27. The consideration we would like the board to look at for the evidence-based model funding, the $898,000, are the technology. We feel very strongly that we need to add a nurse. We have 2 nurses that are driving all over the district daily, trying to meet some very serious medical needs we have, some of our students. Not only those that have allergies, we have diabetes, we have lots of needs. And there are times when there may be an accident or a health clerk out, that it's almost impossible for them to be every place at one time. So that would be one of the, and again, that fits under the one of those evidence-based fundings where we are lacking. The administrative assistant to the director BL, that's Stephanie. Stephanie right now is, well, let's take special ed. Special education, we have about 670 students. We have a director, we have an assistant director, and we have 2 administrative assistants. Stephanie is it. Stephanie has to do all of the input of the data. She has to do a monthly financial report that we send into the state. She does all of the work on her own, plus tries to get into all the buildings to give support to the classroom teachers. And we would like, again, this would fit under the evidence-based funding, to have an administrative assistant to help her with at least the data portion of this so that she could be out in the buildings more. At some point, we'd like to consider having a part-time assistant director for her and coach for the EL population, and an interventionist. But both of those positions we would recommend with our money that we would receive next year. Another area where we were lacking was instructional coaches. We would propose that we would consider 2 instructional coaches. The Jump Up program for pre-K at Avon, you heard us earlier talking about where is this down now? The evidence, the kids assessment for students to see about the kindergarten readiness. Avon was very low. And it doesn't mean that their kindergarten program is low. It means that the kids are coming into Avon School, the low income and the students that have English language issues are coming in with very little preschool, if none, if any, preschool experience. So they're going to show and demonstrate that they are weak being ready for kindergarten. So we would like to do sort of a jump up pre-K program prior to school starting. Supplemental literacy work, we'd like to look at some more materials. Mentoring, one of the areas that Paul and I both feel very strongly about is to, what are we doing to help our new teachers? What are we doing to have these teachers stay with us for a longer period of time, more than 1 or 2 years? So we'd like to have some mentoring, so that we'd have current staff be able to pair up with our new staff to provide some extra help there and support. And also, this goes, the next one, hiring, and we can take that human X off because we just found out how much it is today. We thought, nope, not going to happen. But looking at a consistent process for hiring throughout our district to help us with the diversity piece, to make sure we're being consistent, but also to make sure that our staff are using the same process, the same questions throughout the district. So we're looking at some different programs that we could do with that. So I have a whole document here that really looks into, and I don't even know where I put it. Here it is. That looks at each. It's a very complicated formula that shows where we are not adequate. I didn't go through each one of them, but the biggest one is class size, and I'm going to tell you why it's not recommended on the next sheet. Instructional coaches, we were down by 11 in our district. I'm only recommending 2 right now. Nurses, we should have 3 more than what we have, but we're still only recommending 1. Diverse learners, interventionists in summer school, that all falls under the poverty grant. We are down about 15 staff for that. And then, of course, our media tech, which is our 1-to-1. So there's a formula for each one of these, and any of these places where you see pink, those are where we are lower than where we should be for staffing. Class size. So thinking back to what they said that we should be at, even just the 20 for the non-poverty, our numbers our average class sizes across this district are pretty darn good. We are high at Meadowview in 4th grade, and we're a little high at Woodview in 3rd and 4th grade. But other than the 4th grade class at Meadowview, the rest of the numbers aren't bad. Frederick, that's high. They're 30. Those are their homerooms, so that doesn't mean that every class has 30, but during their homerooms they have 30. GMS is fairly good, 24 and 25. Then you look at Park, again, it's well under what the board parameters are. If we were to look at class size, K-2 at 20 and 3-8 at 25, we would need 30 extra classrooms, which would be about $1.5 million. But that's not the only problem. We don't have the space. We have no space, not enough space at Avon or Prairie View to handle that. Meadowview, we would need to lose some of the specific classrooms we have there for the training rooms and the OT rooms. Woodview, no. Park East, no. Possibly Frederick, GMS, possibly we'd have to do a lot of different usage of classrooms. And Park West, no. So, two issues, the cost of reducing class size. We're not that far off right now, and we don't have the space. So I don't think at this point that would be something that we would want to look at. Tom?
Help me out on the Frederick 30 and then homeroom. What did all that mean?
So when they go to their homerooms for their core classes, they would have 30. But there may be, so for math,
Okay.
they may not have 30 and there may be reduced. A smaller number, depending on, because they do the advanced math programs and
So they pulled in some additional
staff
to
for that.
teach some of those things.
Right.
And so the math specialist, for example, teaches some of those advanced math classes. So those kids have an additional teacher
Yeah.
who divides up, who spreads those kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in well,
Right, and
I'm the guy who made these kinds of reports up, and I know the games I could play with. That's not a too strong word. But I think it'd be interesting, or probably more truthful, to have an asterisk there that says this is 30 in the homeroom, but if you walk into an average math class, there might be 27 maximum.
Okay, good point.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
I have
you.
an additional question around
Yes.
this. I think I remember around the time we were doing the priorities setting, or, kind of looking at priorities, we talked about class size. And I thought you had presented some data that said reducing class size on the margins isn't
That's
impactful
right.
for student outcomes anyway.
Right.
Because you don't get down to a level where
Correct.
it really allows the teacher any more significant instructional dedicated one-on-1 or one-on-10 or whatever.
Right.
It doesn't make a meaningful change in outcomes.
And Hattie's research shows that doesn't, right, unless it's significant. So that was just going down a little bit. So if
Asterisk is also very important.
additional, right, so that, right, and so additional costs there also do not include the additional art, additional music and PE. And other, Karen, what else you'd have? You'd have other encore programming you would need to have.
More programming,
Right.
to fit.
So for that reason, we would not be recommending the class size. So the every student succeed at long-term academic goals by 2032. It would be 90% more of our third grade students reading at or above grade level. However, they have not decided or determined what that means. But that's a statement. Fifth grade students meet or exceed expectations in math. Again, they have not given us what that means. Ninth grade students are on track to graduate with cohort, and I know for a fact that there's people manipulating. That means the 90, so for your core content classes, you can only have one F in any class during that ninth grade class. So some high schools are making it so that you don't get an F. There's no way to get an F. So then they'll have 90% of their kids on track. We don't, and then students graduate high school ready for college and career. But again, they haven't made that determination of what that's going to be. So we have two different things we're looking at. The evidence-based funding, which is on the left, and that's where we're getting our money. That's our $898,000, and we'll be determining, based on their adequate funding, or their adequate, what we should have here, we're gonna propose some goals for the board to consider. On the right-hand side is the ESSA, and they have that we need to define the objectives, gather our information, look at the gaps, which we can get from the EBM, the evidence-based funding model, analyze the data, and gain insights, and then make some recommendations. So even though they're two separate, they do go hand in hand with the gap analysis and making some recommendations. But with ESSA, there's no money following it. With the evidence-based model, there is. The evidence-based model is state, the ESSA is federal. These are just some things that don't take money. They take some professional development. And if you consider that anything over 0.4, it will show some improvement in student achievement. This one is a large one, a very, very high one. This is just the way our teachers think about teaching. Going in there thinking, all of my students can learn. So research is showing that if you do that, you're going to make significant progress. That doesn't take us any money. That doesn't give us no reason for money for here. So some of these things are just good teaching. The things that Paul and Amanda are doing in their work with the curriculum. Looking at what does mastery look like? What am I teaching? What are the students learning? But these are things that we can do in classrooms to help improve student achievement. Another important piece is having the teachers feel that they can affect student achievement, that they be positive of what they do, and that they can affect change. Again, it's something that we can work with without paying any dollars.
That one goes nicely with our theme of reaching new heights together.
Yes.
And that it really does take a collective force to understand that we can make a big difference.
And then teacher credibility, and we have some data on the 5 essentials from this. How do students perceive your teachers? Are they credible? Do they know their stuff, as we can say? Do they really want to be there as a teacher? Those, again, that doesn't cost any money. It's a lot of the things that we're already doing in the district, and that shows, the research is showing that we're going to see a positive effect on our students. Based on our evidence-based funding, we have to send, we just did this the other day, we have to have an annual spending plan. We have to talk about how the funds that we receive are going to contribute to student growth. The report that we sent in, however, we have been told that we're not held accountable for. So we are doing our own tracking of the dollars, and we will do our own tracking of how it is affecting student achievement, because we feel that if you're given $898,000, we better be able to tell the board and our community what we're using it for and how it's affecting our students.
And not just as a transparency piece as well, just to give you an idea of the timeline of this, they said, oh, by the way, you have to submit an annual spending plan to us, and they told us this
Last Tuesday.
September. So by this point, the budget's done, right? Now we have to come up with, now let's backtrack and try to figure out how to make it so that, in light of the fact that it was such a short timeline, they said, okay, well, this isn't going to have any teeth in it, but
You still have to do it.
you still have to do it, and it wouldn't surprise me if this is something that in the future was more than just a survey. So.
I would agree.
We have to explain how we're using the incremental funds, right? The 898 in
Mm-hmm.
this.
No, well, we're supposed to, right. So, but they had just drop-down boxes. You didn't have to put any amounts of money that you were doing or anything specific. It just said, are you going to use it for low-income special ed or English learners? And then it really...
PD or
right.
for services or for additional staff, or so we had to just...
But it was nothing specific, and we felt that it really should have been. I mean, I feel strongly that if I've got that amount of money, I better be able to say why. So, I'm going to skip over to the next one just to show you this. So the dark green spots, we got our first designation, and if you remember, we have 2 schools currently that are designated is low performing, which they're going to change that designation to, oh, shoot, I got it here. They're going to change it. They've changed it so much on me every day that I don't know. They're going to change them anyway, and then to comprehensive and, why can't I think? I got it. Targeted. So instead of saying you're a low-performing school, it's not going to say you're targeted. If the lowest performing is going to be comprehensive. So it sounds better. In June, there were 3 components that led up to our designation. The EL proficiency for 5%, the ELA proficiency of 10%, and the math proficiency of 10% on the park. Okay, that was in June. At the end of October now, so that was only 25% of our total score. In the end of October, you will see that now we've added 20% of our rating will be based on the chronic absenteeism. You'll have ELA proficiency, math proficiency, but the largest component there is 50% growth over 2 years of your park. Then you'll also have your EL proficiency. So it's still, the only part that will not be included is the 5 essentials, and that's the student response on the 5 essentials. So 95% of your 2018 score will be everything except for the EL or the 5 essentials. So there's going to be a huge difference in our scores, and some people are saying there could be an 80% change in how we are designated. Now, it could go up because we have that growth. We could add more schools. So when we originally thought about this, I thought I would be able to talk to the community prior to the end of October to talk about these designations, but now I have no clue. I don't want to go out and say, hey, we've got 2 schools that are low performing or now targeted, and then have 5 schools or have no schools. So this will come at the end of October. What we're working on now is a dashboard document that we're talking about all the things that we would like the community to know about our school. The activities that the kids are involved at, the demographics. And we're going to put this all together so that we can have that out to the community prior to our final designations.
Many school districts are very concerned about that 50% block because it's going to have a heavy weight. Obviously, 50% is going to have a lot. And so what that means is many very, very high-performing school districts are actually very nervous about that because
they're not going to show growth.
If the students were high-performing, they have to show even more high growth to show growth. And so the interesting thing is if they got a perfect score, for example, if a student got a perfect score on the assessment, and they got a perfect score the next year on the assessment, there's no growth. So 50% of their school rating is going to be based on no growth. And so that's really scary. And we do have some amazing pockets of growth that we are seeing in many of our subgroups, in many of our areas, and our overall park results. You're going to hear some more next month, but we have seen a good increase, a very appropriate increase. And in some grade levels, every single subgroup increased from last year's. So we're very, very proud of some of those data pieces. That's what we want to get on the website, to share those very, very, very good information that we're making incremental increases in growth and change. Part of it's based on our curriculum work. Some of it is about teacher awareness of targets. Some of it is
well, the teacher training. I mean, the work that we put into the strategies.
So that 50% section is really scary to many, many school districts, and I think it's going to be an asset for us because we're going to be able to show that many of our kids in our subgroups specifically have shown good growth, and so we're going to get that's going to be bonus points for us in that. So I think hopefully we'll see. And the hard part is that none of this data is made available to us ahead of time. We're not really sure about what data pieces they're using. Just like the attendance, we don't know where it came from. We also have some questions about all of this.
And the chronic absenteeism is another one that especially the high schools are concerned about. Very concerned. So that's where we are with this, and what we are going to do at the next meeting is bring some recommendations to you about how we would propose to use the $898,000. We're not going to use it all this year. There's no way, because especially with staff, it's too late in the year to probably get some of these staff. But at least we can put it on paper what we would like to do It's a good problem to have, but we want to make sure we make the right decisions for how we use that money and target it to the areas that really, really need it. Got questions?
Real quick, because we talked about adding encore and foreign language, other type of programming. With as short as our school day is, how is that gonna take away from other classroom time?
That,
I mean, are we looking at having to shave 5 minutes off of every topic to put in another section of the day? Or, you know, is the evidence-based funding model allowed to be used so you can increase the school day?
some districts have done that, and we're going to have to look at analysis. I looked at about 20 different school districts across the state and how they were using their funding. Very similar to what we're recommending, but there was one that actually added a half an hour to each day.
I think it's something we can consider.
Yeah. I think it's an,
You're spending the extra money on a long day.
yeah, I would too. And so that's something we need to,
The other part to that is, if you add those sections, do we also then have to look at increased building sizes as well, because they have to be in a room? Or how?
I think we're okay with the building side. I think that part, but we definitely would cost some money. So what we have to do is John would have to do an analysis of the cost of adding a half an hour to each person's day. And,
Or whatever additional time you think would be necessary.
right. Well, I'd love to have more than a half an hour, but we could, yeah, maybe we could do 2 or 3 different options, but,
I mean,
yeah,
it's something we should be looking at and planning for.
I agree.
If we're gonna do technology and some of those other stuff, and if lengthening the school day is another one of those that makes a big impact because you're not shortening the topics.
right.
With Stephen, I'm more than happy to go down that road if we have to. It's gonna take a little planning. Because it probably, it's not gonna happen next year.
No, but
Probably won't happen next year, but if we're gonna get another big jump in money like we did
this
this
year,
year,
right,
that's a good chunk of money towards that.
absolutely.
We should be looking, maybe that's something we should be looking at too.
No, I agree.
Same thing here. One other thing about educating the public is that a lot of people will remember that when they went to school, there was plenty of room. And now, and when we added on it, now was the science wing and all this stuff, I remember we had almost 4,500 kids in that building. They had up and down staircases and all that, and we had plenty of room. And now you have less kids and you gotta add on to the building.
Right.
We need to be educated that we have special needs,
Yes.
rooms that we did not have to have 30 years
You're right.
when you were in school.
Yep.
So that's an education process all the
Yep.
way through.
Again, it's a good problem to have to
Yeah.
spend the money,
Yeah.
but.
Thank you. Substitute pay. What was the discussion regarding that?
So the issue with substitute pay is, Ellen has asked me to look at the daily pay rates that we have for our substitute teachers, specifically in relation to other neighboring school districts. And when we did an informal poll of some of our neighboring districts, we came in at the bottom of all 7 districts in our area in terms of our daily substitute pay rate. As you may know, there's a substitute shortage in the state in general already. The state has already changed some of the requirements on even what it takes to become a substitute teacher. It used to be a bachelor's degree, and they've opened up a one-time license for people with associate's degrees. So while we're experiencing a substitute shortage, everybody's experiencing a substitute shortage. But one of the things that Ellen and I had discussed is, even though we're experiencing it statewide, we also don't want the finances to be a negative factor in teachers considering coming to our district. We have had feedback from other substitutes, regular substitutes that we've had, that have expressed that there are times where they might wait before accepting an assignment from Grays Lake, before seeing what other districts might give them an offer, knowing that they will make more money at another neighboring district. So we've looked at it. Right now, we're paying $95 per day for a short-term sub-assignment. As I said, that's the bottom of our neighboring districts. Most other districts in our area are at about $100 to $110. Most of them are at the $110 rate. It would be my recommendation, obviously not taking action tonight, but it would be my recommendation to consider trying to match the $110 rate that some of our neighboring districts are using, so that we're not having a negative effect on when teachers decide to come substitute for us. Looking at something like that, it's an estimated cost of about $80,000 to the school district over the course of the year, so it's a small amount of money, but not a substantial amount, and I'm hoping something like that would have a positive impact both on class morale, PA morale, as well as just the quality of teachers that we have in those classrooms. So,
What's the highest one you see?
$110.
That's not really the highest.
And that's why some districts have, the thing that's interesting for me is you don't want to get into a price war, right? Like there's a limited supply, so all you do in a price war is say, okay, I'm going to pay $115, and that way I don't have to worry about it. Well, that just means every other school district around you is just going to start raising their rate to $115, and all we do is artificially increase the rate that we're paying our substitute teachers. It's not going to increase our pool, but I believe that if we match what other districts are doing in the area without going over them, that should help us with some of the substitute shortages that we do experience just locally at Grace Lake.
And it certainly wouldn't, I mean, it's not gonna, right now, we're actively hurting ourselves, so,
Yes.
I'd support it.
yeah, I mean, I would support that. The action on that next time. Thank you, John. New pickup for the district.
So the district currently has a 2000 Chevy K3500, and it has probably lived to the extent that you could possibly get out of a 2000, well, an 18-year-old vehicle at this point. The discussion about this actually started back in January when this specific truck broke down and resulted in being out of service for over a week in the shop and about $2,500 in repairs. And honestly, that's about what the truck is worth right now. So it's our recommendation. It's part of the budget that was just improved, so there wouldn't be any changes needed for the budget, but it would be our recommendation to consider purchasing a new truck for the O&M department and to properly dispose of the 2000 Chevy that we currently have. The total cost would be an estimated $35,000, probably less. We're still trying to get some delivery fees calculated into that. Getting a plow on it and all that fun stuff. So.
When did we buy the last one?
2016.
16? Okay. And how many do we have? I don't remember how many we have.
Plow trucks, there's 8, 3 minivans, or 3 vans with a minivan included in that, and that's all we have.
Okay. How are we looking as far as upcoming years for replacing other vehicles?
Yeah, we should. That's been discussed amongst us that we should,
We would like to have a replacement calendar.
yeah, plan. Because the next one's a 2000, well, we have 2 2002s that are coming up next. Then the next newest is 2007, 8.
2010, correct?
Uh,
A 2010 as well.
No, we have 2010. I'm here of the truck. And the minivan that we bought that has been working out well, we should start considering to look at updating, because it's a 2012 and it's, what, about 115,000 miles on it now? Amazing how many times it goes around the district delivering mail.
Yeah.
One of the other things we've talked, O&M and I have talked internally and also started to reach out to other school districts as well, is purchases like this tend to cause spikes, obviously, in the budget. There ends up with, $35,000 to purchase a new truck this year, and then nothing, and then $35,000. So talking about a refresh cycle of having, as weird as it sounds, especially with the market the way it is with pickup trucks nowadays, there are used trucks that are going for almost as much as new trucks. So almost getting into a section where, and we want to look at the finances of it all first, but look at, okay, what does it look like to buy a truck, and then after a couple of years be able to put it out on the market, get a decent amount of money back for it, and have a newer cycle of the trucks, kind of the repair issues, some of the times when trucks are down, and still do something that over the long run is financially good for the district. So instead of $35,000 once, and then 5 years later another $35,000, something that, as you're going through the cycle, maybe it's only a $5,000 price difference per year. So.
Yeah, just let us, I mean, as far as the truck now, I would support getting a new one, but let us know what you come up with as far as that cycle idea goes.
There's no way we can favor local vendors, just strictly bid.
That's something that we're kind of looking into right now. So essentially, we have two different options. We've looked at the state. The state has a bid for Ford trucks. The good part about that is, obviously, it's the state bid, right? So you get a pretty good, fair deal on that. But the problem with that is normally it's a several-month turnaround time. We're hoping to try to get this in before the snow starts falling. In terms of local dealers, the only one I'm aware of is the Chevy dealership. And when we reached out to them and asked them what kind of pricing they have, I believe their words were, we haven't even seen a 2019 Chevy truck yet, so we don't even know what price to give you. Apparently, the demand on these trucks is so ridiculous right now that they didn't even seem interested in trying to give us a price. We've looked at other, not within our district boundaries, but other local Ford dealers who have expressed an interest in trying to match state pricing. So we're kind of doing some of the analysis on that.
Does it need to be a 19?
No.
A new 18?
Right.
They can be 18, but they don't have any of them.
Well, you're looking
Right.
a little late in the 18 cycle, I get it.
Yes.
There may be some with our name on it.
Could be, but I've asked around and there's not many.
Like I said, we're living in a strange age where pickup trucks, the demand is through the roof right now for them. And the prices that even I'm suggesting are pretty remarkable when you consider if you go to an actual lot and compare what we're getting quoted from the state versus what a person would actually pay themselves, it's at least $12,000 difference. So the demand is driving the price on these vehicles, and that was why we were looking into possibly having a refresh cycle. If the demand is this high, let's take advantage of the market while it's hot.
You can find the sweet spot when the truck's not that old and it still has a high
Right.
resale
Right,
value.
yeah.
You're not gonna incur all those back-end maintenance costs. You get a good price for your used car and you have a refresh.
And I'm just a fan of the budget implications, right? Again, not having that every couple year
Right.
spike. There's that steadiness of, okay, we bought one, we sold one, we bought one, we sold one, and there's the balance, the expectation of what it's gonna be.
How many total trucks?
No, I said it's about 3 years before you really start on the plow trucks, putting tires, brakes, that type of stuff. So if we could look at and get it honed into exactly when it would be, just what you said. I mean, the 16's worth 34,000 on Blue Book, Kelly Blue Book right now.
Amazing, isn't it?
Like I said, this is crazy in my opinion. But hey, if people want to spend $34,000 on a 2-year-old truck and I can go out and buy a brand new one for $34,000,
How many trucks are in the fleet? 8?
8 plow trucks and 3 vans.
John's got a truck for us for sale right now.
For what it's worth, they contact me when I buy mine, it's a 2007. $160,000. And they say they got a market for it.
Oh, yeah, sure they do.
Immediately.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Future agenda items.
We'll have the Grays Lake Park District contract discussion, some recommendations for our evidence-based model funding. One-to-one, we're going to have talk about the one-to-one discussion proposal, and we'll have our consultant with us that night. The recommendation to increase our sub-pay to $110. What else do we have? Roof. Pardon me? Roof. Roof. Dog barking at we're just talking about them. That's the next thing, next roof that we use.
I have a question for you. This report about the teacher survey, some people call themselves encore teachers. Do we have encore?
We do. Ta-da! Encore.
Tell us more.
Arts, music, dramatically speaking, drama, and innovations. So that's, encore could be special. If they're not elected, because we have 4 and there are 4 quarters, so you get them all. You can't elect to have that, but those are our 9-week quarter rotation classes for 7th and 8th.
But we keep saying we don't have encore anymore.
There's an additional encore, is what we're looking for.
All right.
Because right now, it's like, art or music every day
Right,
or whatever
right.
instead.
And I want to read there's many great comments in this, and this is the teacher survey. I really enjoyed the equity presentation and have been very mindful of the language I'm using with my students and thinking through conversations about inclusiveness with my students. That is a heavy statement. That means somebody got something out of that in service. So,
Thank you, Tom.
good stuff.
Guessing there are no public comments? Anyone? In that case, I don't think we need a closed session, so if I could have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Masco,
Aye.
Mack,
Aye.
Strack,
Aye.
Weedman,
Aye.
Braden.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.